The government's troubled website will be running smoothly by the end of November, administration officials say, and I've just told you about that. Administration has also scrambled to fix that problem, and we will keep an eye on that and let you know how that goes. Well, the latest name-calling of President Obama may or may not have happened, but the fact that it is making news is an example of why some think the president is not getting the respect a president deserves. One version is that Representative Pete Sessions said, quote, "I cannot even stand to look at you," end of quote, to the president during a debt ceiling meeting. But the White House now says the quote is not accurate and it's all a miscommunication. We asked presidential historians Doug Wead and K.C. to discuss this issue, and they both join us via Skype. And I'd like to thank you both for being here with us. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
K.C., I want to start with you. And this allegation has been made a number of times over the course of President Obama's presidencies, and that is that he has been maligned and publicly disrespected more than any president in history, particularly by other elected officials. What's your take on that?
I think that's what distinguishes President Obama from some of his predecessors, is that we've seen the attacks come from very high-ranking members of Congress, and a sense of respect for the institution of the presidency that was somewhat traditional for members of Congress, despite obvious partisan and ideological disagreements, really does appear to have frayed during the Obama years. It started with the Joe Wilson attack during the president's first State of the Union address, and I think it's persisted really throughout his presidency.
Doug, I know that you have a different perspective. Why don't you think that's the case?
Well, unfortunately, these presidents have had bitter attacks all through history, with the exception of George Washington. With the beginning of political parties, the Adams-Jefferson fights were very bitter with members of Congress and the Senate on both sides. The Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison battles. In fact, William Henry Harrison buried his 3 adult children in the 3 years leading up to his presidency and then died himself within 30 days. He was accused of embezzlement, of all kinds of outrageous language against him, followed by Andrew Jackson, who led the attacks on Harrison. His own wife died after she read the newspapers and saw the attacks, claiming he was an adulterer, a bigamist. Unfortunately, it got even more bitter during the Civil War years, but all the way into modern times. And Nixon, Truman, Reagan have been the recipients of very bitter and personal attacks. Bill Clinton.
You know, I don't think anyone would disagree with you that there has been criticism for every president, but it does perhaps seem, at least to many, that this is different. So, K.C., let me come back to you. How much do you think race, the first African-American president, plays a role in this seeming disrespect?
Well, it's very difficult to get inside the mindset of those in Congress, again, who have criticized the president. And while it's true that every president has been attacked, I think if we can go back to the George W. Bush presidency, we didn't have, say, Democratic members of the House or the Senate suggesting that maybe George W. Bush was not born in the United States, or standing up and calling Bush a liar during a State of the Union address. So there seems to be something more intense that we've seen during the Obama years. And it does seem as if, if you go from Wilson again to members of the House who have suggested maybe that Obama's birth certificate wasn't valid, there seems like an overlap between that and many of the districts that were skeptical about civil rights legislation a half century ago. Of course, there's no way of absolutely proving this. We'll know in 2017 when there's a new president. Perhaps we'll also see that president deemed a liar during his or her State of the Union address. But I'm guessing that's not going to be the case.
Doug, let me just ask you, I know that you're both of you are presidential historians, and I understand what you said, that every president is disliked, every president is criticized. However, can you look back in your knowledge of history, was there ever a governor that pointed their finger in the face of a president that made it into the press? Was there ever a time that the opposition party set as their agenda to make sure that nothing that the president submitted would get through? Can you look back through your knowledge of history and identify similar cases?
Well, of course, during the Civil War, I mean, Lincoln was referred to as a guerrilla in the newspapers of his own party, and his own cabinet member, Secretary of State, referred to him in letters to his wife as our dear imbecile. He was eventually murdered, and governors all over the South attacked him, and there was actually a civil war. They withdrew. George W. Bush was referred to as Hitler by a Democrat congressman from Minnesota. If you're African American, it is extremely painful to go through this process and to see your president and the first African American president go through this terrible experience or rite of passage that presidents go through. But I think history shows that, and it's unfortunate, I believe, that there's just a very bitter partisan divide, and people start rooting for one side or the other. And I have to credit President Obama, and I think one of the reasons he got elected is he shares with Ronald Reagan an ability to avoid being dragged into it. He speaks without guile. And I think that's part of his success as a politician.
Yeah, and to go back to one of the comments that you made, and I think the president would agree, he's all of our presidents, the whole United States, not just of African Americans, while there are many African Americans are proud to see that he's in office. KC, I just wanted to mention to you, based on your knowledge, can you go back and pinpoint a time, not even just the general vitriol and venom, but for instance, with the extreme right part of the Republican Party, the Tea Party, being so opposed to the president. Can you find another parallel, as Doug says that there is throughout history?
Well, I think you can suggest as a possible parallel the 1850s or the early 1860s, but that to me is a very troubling parallel to draw indeed, because what we had during that point was a significant segment of the population that was saying they should secede entirely from the United States. And so that's really the only parallel that you can draw, and I think that actually is a decent parallel. That suggests that there's really something different in terms of the treatment of President Obama that we've seen from more modern periods. Intense criticism, yes, but I mean, we really haven't seen another instance in which members of Congress have suggested that the President of the United States might not actually have been born in the United States.
How would you, Casey, assess how the president has handled this harsh criticism?
Well, I think he's handled it very well. It's been difficult because, of course, Obama, as we all know, campaigned in 2008 on the platform of bringing the country together. He is the first African-American president. There is a cultural bias against his appearing as an angry black man, which I think would have hurt him as well. And so there are options in terms of how he's handled the attacks that might not have been available to another president. But by and large, I think he's done quite well. And I would agree with my colleague that he's avoided being drawn into some of these very nasty attacks that might have tarnished his image.
K.C. Johnson and Doug Wead, thank you both so much for your perspective and for being on Rise America.
Thank you.